Hey YouTube, Warbles on a lot here. The Indonesian government has decided to parole Schapelle Corby. They're going to let her out. She's going to be allowed to live at her sister's place in Indonesia until 2017, when they'll then allow her to leave the country. I'll bet she's happy about that. I feel very sorry for Schapelle Corby. No, really I do. Schapelle Corby was a 28-year-old painted secretary, party girl. I don't really know what she was, whether she was a childcare worker or a hairdresser or something like that. Beautician, I think. And she lived in Queensland, and she was going to go on a holiday to Bali, and she took her boogie board in a boogie board bag or a cover, and she got on an aeroplane at a regional airport in Queensland, and she handed her boogie board in its cover into the airport's cargo handling system. And the theory was that somebody else would just take care of her luggage, and she would get on an aeroplane in Queensland, fly to Sydney, get across the airport to the international terminal. Somebody else would make sure that her bag and luggage was offloaded from the one aeroplane, shifted across the airport to the other aeroplane, loaded on the correct aeroplane, and when she got off in Bali, she was going to pick up her luggage. Okay, so she got to Bali, and the customs man said to her as she was sort of, bored, standing there in line, looking out the window, "Excuse me, madam, is this your bag?" And she says, "Yes, it's my bag." So he undid the zip and he looked at it and he said, "So this must be your 10 pounds of cannabis, madam. Come with me. Here go the handcuffs. Clink, clink," and off she went into the system. And the Indonesians convicted her. It was her bag. She said it was her bag. She flew into Australia, had her name on it. She could offer no explanation for how the cannabis got to be in the bag. And a whole bunch of Australians said, "Oh, wicked evil, like, this doesn't sound right." And a whole bunch of other Australians, particularly the law and order side of the community, the older people, the people who've got no fucking idea what pot works like, they figured that because her father had a beard and long hair and he looked a bit like a bikie, and he had 100 acres in Queensland, and he had some previous drug connections or convictions or something. The Women's Weekly wrote stories about it, articles and stuff. They figured that her father must have grown that pot and put it in her bag to use her as a dummy to smuggle it into Bali so that he could, then show up and sell it. Total conjecture on their part, but that was the rumour that was going around, I know, because my mother knows fucking nothing about pot, and that's what she told me she'd heard among her friends, But the Ladies Spinning and Weaving Club, or the United Church Youth Group, where nobody under 75 is allowed go. But what I thought at the time was, why the bloody hell would anybody take 10 pounds of pot to Bali? The price of pot in Australia, farm gate prices, mates rates, if you know where to go and who to talk to, go out there into the scrub and you may get it for $280 an ounce or $10 a gram. Once upon a time, back when Paul Keating was the Prime Minister, it could have been as much as $450 an ounce at the farm gate, but then, things changed and Johnny Howard got in and the price of pots come down and 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 down. And, yeah, just before harvest, when it's at its peak, $10 a gram at the farm gate. And it was about the same when Schapelle Corby got busted. So you could say that 10-pound bag of pot at $4,480 a pound, it cost somebody from the city driving out of Brisbane or out of the Gold Coast, out of Rockhampton, wherever it was that she got on the plane, they would have gone off into the hinterlands of Queensland and paid $45,000 for 10 pounds if they paid top prices in Australia. If they had really good connections, they might have got it for $35,000. But in Bali, a pound of prime heads is only worth $500. So there is no commercial incentive for anybody in Australia who's in possession of a 10-pound bag of pot to try to smuggle it to Bali, because it's going to cut 5/6 off the price of the bag of pot. It's not worth doing. It's a lot of risk and no return, and you destroy the value of your asset by doing it. It's trade done backwards. Okay, so there's no no reason for that pot to be Schapelle, so that's probably why she had no explanation for what it was doing in her bag. She was just, don't know, mister. So she's done 15 years, I think, something like that. And what else was going on that day? Well, we found out 3 or 6 months later through the Australian Federal Police and Drug Enforcement Agency making a big brouhaha about it and patting themselves on the back because they'd busted a cocaine importation gang nestled among the cargo handlers at the international terminal at Kingsford Smith International Airport at the suburb of Mascot in Sydney. And the same day that Schapelle Corby was trying to fly to Bali with a boogie board, they were trying to bring $2 or $20 million, I forget the details, but there was a thunderingly large chunk of nose candy. Let's go with $2 million, we will undershoot, we won't go for the high estimate. $2 million worth of nose candy was coming in through the international terminal. And my surmise, my suspicion, is that the cargo handlers at Sydney, they didn't want to risk having a drug sniffing dog notice their $2 million worth of cocaine. So I suspect that the cargo handlers at Sydney got in touch with a cargo handler in Queensland and said, can you get a hold of a 10-pound bag of pot and stick it in somebody's luggage that's getting on an aeroplane up there that's being booked through the international terminal. Doesn't matter who they are or where they're fucking going, just stick a 10-pound bag of pot in their luggage so the dogs have got something to sniff around, and all the D.E.A. and the people who are actually trying to catch it, the customs people and the federal police, they'll have something to do, and therefore they won't find the coke. Alright, so Schapelle puts her bag into the system. The unknown baggage handler in Queensland spots a bag that's labelled, book through to Bali, and he takes it into a broom closet and he makes an addition to the bag, and he probably would have been wearing gloves and the bag would have been dusted or wiped clean, wouldn't have had no fingerprints on it, no DNA on it, not human DNA, and it's gone into her bag. She arrives in Bali only to find that for some reason the sniffing of the dogs didn't find an absolutely undisguised bag of pot in a clear plastic bag, one zipper away from the outside atmospheric air going through the terminal. So nobody's made any attempt to cover it up, no hidden bottoms or secret compartments or breaking it up into small packets and hiding it in lots of bits of luggage, none of that shit. This is just one great big huge bag of pot. Just merely relying on the Ziploc seal, which won't fool a sniffing dog at 100 metres range, So you'd almost think that that bag of pot was designed to be found, and it was, because that's what the cocaine smuggling crew were hoping to happen. But what the cocaine smuggling crew were not aware of was that the Johnny Howard employed Australian Federal Police, the same people who, when a bloke heard that his son was mixed up with a bad crew and he was being given a free ticket to go to Bali and come back to Australia, the Bali Nine, the people who got put on a death penalty. This old bloke rang up a mate of his in the Federal Police and said, look, can you blokes stop my son from leaving Australia? Oh yes, we'll look into it, said the Australian Federal PoLice man. And their version of looking into it was to inform the Indonesian PoLice that these Australians are going over there so that they can smuggle heroin out of Indonesia into Australia, because that's the way the drug trade works, out of Indonesia into Australia. The drug trade does not work out of Australia into Indonesia. So anyway, the bloke who asked the Federal Police to arrest his kid because he was going on a drug smuggling operation, he wound up giving the police the tip that got his son busted, and that's why he's on death row in Indonesia. That Federal Police, they were the ones who gave the drug-sniffing dogs too much Valium in their can of Pal, or took them out to the national park so they could hunt kangaroos and antechinus, something else. So there were no drug-sniffing dogs at the international terminal on the day that the cocaine was coming in, because the Federal Police had the whole operation sussed. They were in surveillance mode. They wanted to follow it. They wanted to nail the people who organised the $2 million to come into the country, and they didn't give a flying fuck about a bag of pot being exported. And that could be why Julie Bishop has been saying, oh, she hopes the media was to grant Schapelle Corby her privacy. Code for the Liberal National Government does not want the Fox media, the Murdoch media, to ask Schapelle Corby anything, because it's to be swept under the carpet with all the other shit that happened while Johnny Howard was the Prime Minister. The great Liberal god among the clowns that are running the country at the moment. So yesterday we have Tony Budgie Smuggling Wingnut Mad Monk Abbott saying that, oh, well, you know, like, regardless of what people might think about the issues, the court gave its verdict and Schapelle Corby was a convicted criminal, and, you know, therefore she had to do a time. It was very good, and he hopes she gets, you know, paroled as soon as possible. And today he's making noises about how he hopes that she doesn't manage to somehow make any profit from her criminal activities. And he's the Prime Minister, so he can't do anything about it, but he'll leave it up to the law enforcement agencies to do the right thing. Yeah. Well, Tony Abbott, you budgie smuggling wingnut halfwit, she's never been convicted under Australian law. So I hope the rumours that media are offering her $2, $5, $10, $50 million for her story on what actually happened, I hope she takes that cheque to the bank and cashes the fucking lot of it. Don't forget, all you people who think that the Liberal national side of politics is, you know, a bunch of nice people. The first thing Johnny Howard did when he was elected was to close the Tasmanian branch of the Australian Customs Department for cost-cutting reasons. The second thing he did was put the auditors through ATSIC because Pauline Hanson said that was her policy, and he wanted to bring all the racists and all the Nazis and all the right-wing Fruit Loop fringe lunatics onto his side of politics. But when he closed the Tasmanian Customs branch, the price of heroin in Australia dropped by 50% and the purity tripled. And that's why Maxine McHugh, the ABC radio news journalist who was edged out of the ABC and went on to take Johnny Howard's seat from him, that's why the reason she was edged out of the ABC was because she asked Johnny Howard at a press conference during his first re-election campaign when he was trying to bring in the GST. She said, Mr Prime Minister, will heroin be cheaper under the GST than it is right now because you've already dropped the price by 600% since you've been in office? And Johnny Howard huffed and puffed and blustered, and Maxine McHugh lost her job, and Johnny Howard eventually lost his job when she took his job as the parliamentary member. She got elected in his seat. But while Johnny Howard was in, during those first 3 years, when there was no customs branch in Tasmania, if you wanted to bring heroin into Australia, you sailed a boat to Tasmania and posted it through Australia Post. And the death rate from accidental overdoses of heroin tripled. Johnny Howard got rid of Australia's heroin addicts by feeding them cheap smack. There you go. Some backstories on Liberal national drug policy. What a bunch of fucking scumbags they are, and how they are quite prepared to sell Australian citizens down the river and leave them languishing and rotting in jails for decades. Warbles on a lot to YouTube. Think about it. Ciao.